Now, please, if you won't mind, we'll open the first session. I have one request to you. All those who participants, please leave the video open so we can see you. All those who are listening to us, please just keep the picture, because I can see only 25 people. And in a few minutes will be more, so I want to see everybody and then to see how it goes. The first session is about what we call the female voice, but the first talk is not. I had to make a few changes, and I was planning to put Dr. Schwartzman in another session, but then unfortunately one of the people who wanted to talk, who was offered to talk in the first session, she unfortunately got sick and couldn't attend. So I asked Julia to talk to us first. We are going to hear Dr. Julia Schwartzman from the Western Galilee College. I will just introduce you by name and affiliation. You will introduce yourself. That's the best way to do it. Julia, please. Unmute yourself, please.
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm very honored to open this workshop. Actually, I'm not a historian. I come from the field of Jewish thought, and particularly gender in Judaism. So this is my first experience with historians. So excuse me if I'm not speaking as a historian. And as Chaim said, the only female voice in my presentation will be mine. I will speak about a man that I grew to love very much, although I haven't met him. I couldn't meet him. So I will begin my story. About 2 years ago, I somehow came upon a little essay entitled The Path of Moses, a scholarly essay on the case of women in religious faith. The essay was written in Hebrew at the end of the 19th century by an obscure Hungarian author by the name of Moses Salomon. It was published in Vienna in 1899 and attracted no attention whatsoever, neither at the time of its publication nor in the years to come. It is written in a typical rabbinic style, very flowery, literally woven from biblical verses and rabbinic sayings. The main text is quite laconic, but it is accompanied by more than 100 extremely long, meticulous footnotes. While there is nothing special about the form of the essay, its content is definitely extraordinary for its time. This is a courageous critique of the place of women in Jewish society and in Jewish religious practices. The question I asked myself once I understood the significance of the essay was, who was this Moses Salomon? The author signed his book, The Youngest Among the Sages, the Lowly Moses Salomon of Khust. By pure coincidence, I immediately knew that Khust was in Hungary. And this is where I began my quest for the identity of the author. At that point, I knew virtually nothing about the history and the geography of Hungary. Eventually, geography turned out to be the most important discipline for my quest. I knew nothing about Hungarian Jewry either, if one doesn't count a guided tour of the Pest synagogue that I took a few years ago with Chaim. So I started my quest literally from zero. While I found quite easily the basic facts about Hungarian Jewry in the 19th century, the search for the identity of the author of the essay turned into a real adventure. In retrospect, I could have been spared parts of this adventure should I have had some knowledge of the Hungarian language. But as enthusiastic as I was, learning Hungarian was beyond my skills. So I had to settle for Google Translate. I will not bother you with a description of my thrilling adventure, despite the temptation to do so. And I will go straight to the main facts about the life of Rabbi Salomon that I managed to establish some 6 months into my research. Rabbi Moses Salomon was born in 1837 in Khust, a town in eastern Hungary. Today it is in Ukraine. He spent most of his professional life as the rabbi of a tiny community in the town of Tordosin. Forgive my pronunciation, I don't know how to pronounce it. In the northwestern part of Hungary. Today it is in Slovakia. His original background was an ultra-Orthodox one, but during his lifetime, he slowly shifted from ultra-Orthodoxy to mainstream Orthodoxy and later to Neolog Judaism. But he remained all his life an Orthodox Jew. In his 60s, he published 5 essays on different subjects, including the one I have been working on about the unfair treatment of women in Judaism. And he died in Tordosin, in his hometown, in 1912. Sometime after I established Rabbi Salomon's identity, I discovered that he wrote a short autobiography 10 years before the publication of the above-mentioned essay. I had no difficulty finding it in the National Library in Jerusalem. It appeared in a collection of Salomon's writings and was published in 1910 in his hometown, some 23 years after it had been written. In the introduction to the book, Salomon explains that he decided to publish this autobiography in order to show what he had to go through in order to reach his goal and to become the man he has become. He expresses hope that his readers will learn from it that one should begin his education when he is still young, and when learning is easy, because it will be much harder to do at a mature age. The autobiography is written in Hebrew in 116 6-line rhyme stanzas and is entitled The Days of My Life. Like in his other literary creations, here too Solomon makes extensive use of biblical verses and allusions, but this time his style is spiced with a pinch of bittersweet humor. What is especially charming is Solomon's ability to paint a scene in a few strokes and to turn the story of his life into a lively reading. Naturally, it begins with his childhood in Khust. Although it does not mention it, Khust is part of the Maramoros region, which is considered to be the cradle of the Central European ultra-Orthodoxy. It tells us that he grew up in a humble family, the youngest of 2 sons. The family was poor to the point of sending him as a little boy to earn his living as a peddler. Despite the hardships, his thirst for learning was so strong that, encouraged by his mother, he did not quit the cheder while trying to sell whatever he could think of. Solomon tells us that his educational experience with the Melamed of the cheder included being hit with whatever the Melamed had at that moment under his hand. Eventually, Solomon's father got so impressed with his progress and his love of the Torah that he sent him to the yeshiva of Rabbi Yaakov Katina, the author of some halachic and Musar books. Solomon humorously describes his first day in the yeshiva. It turned out he was the youngest of Rabbi Katina's students. The poor boy was virtually petrified by Rabbi's sight. The rabbi, says Solomon, looked like the angel of death. He was thin like the cows in Pharaoh's dream, his bones protruding from his skin. He wore a long beard and equally long side locks. His eyes were shooting mortal arrows from under his bushy eyebrows. For the entire week, nobody paid attention to Solomon, who sat quietly alone while all the students were conversing with the rabbi. On the evening of the last day of the week, the rabbi decided to test his new student's knowledge. Without warning, it darted toward him like a wolf after his prey. Solomon was numb with fear. Determined to make him speak, the rabbi cursed him, hit him with his walking stick, while occasionally pulling on his ears and hair. We may guess that this did not prove effective. However, the rabbi was not deterred by by the results, and he continued to use the same pedagogical means in the following weeks, until one day Solomon retaliated by pulling hard on the rabbi's beard. When the rabbi recovered from the initial shock, he grabbed the boy and threw him into the yeshiva's dark yard. In the meantime, at Solomon, the other students were having the time of their lives watching the scene. At first, Solomon was terrified all alone in the dark, cold yard, but as the custom of throwing him to the street became a weekly routine, he learned to entertain himself. He would put on a little fire and bake potatoes that he had hidden in the yard beforehand. The story of Solomon's experience as a yeshiva student is certainly not unique. In the last decades of the 19th century and even later, there is a whole genre of autobiographies and novellas describing the crude manners and violent educational methods of the rabbis. However, to me, who spent hours reading Solomon's essays, it gave some perspective on his lively personality and wit, his extraordinary thirst for learning, his optimism, his humor, and his self-criticism. Also, it made me understand why he signed all his books the youngest among the sages, the lowly Moses Solomon of Hust. He probably did it in order to never forget his difficult beginnings. In the following pages, Solomon tells us of his later experiences. It seems that he never got used to his first rabbi, and after his bar mitzvah, he left Hust for good. In the years to come, he will wander from yeshiva to yeshiva, hoping to find some more hospitable place for his studies. His description of the life of the yeshiva bochers of the second half of the 19th century Central Europe is quite illuminating. Solomon describes the harsh anti-sanitarian conditions of their lives. They were literally starving for food, living in appalling poverty, wearing dirty clothes, teeming with lice. One day, Solomon tells us, he was so hungry that he drank the lamp oil. As a result, he almost died of poisoning. Apparently, at some point, things went better, and he even began earning money as the teacher of young children. Very proud of his new status, he bought himself new, expensive clothes and went home to show to his parents his achievements. His mother opened the door and first thing burst into laugh. Solomon was so hurt by this welcome that he turned on his heels and went away without crossing the threshold. He swore that he would not return to his parents' home until no one would laugh at him. He kept his promise, he adds. After years of wandering from yeshiva to yeshiva, Solomon somehow found himself in Liptovsky Sviaty Mikuláš, a town in Western Hungary, today in Slovakia. Liptovsky Sviaty Mikuláš had apparently a bad reputation among ultra-Orthodox Jews because of its tolerance toward the masculine. People he met on his way there warned him, he recalls, to keep away from the town. Once there, he was shocked when he saw for the first time in his life beardless Jewish men in the streets. He was so frightened by their sight that he ran for cover in a synagogue. How surprised he was when those same beardless men filled the synagogue toward the time of the prayer. Moreover, after the prayer they stayed to study Torah. Eventually, Liptovsky Sviaty Mikuláš became the place that transformed Solomon from a boor into a learned rabbi and an intellectual. The person that influenced him most was Rabbi Yisachar Dov Bar Sinai of Mikuláš, a close student of the Hatam Sofer and the author of the halachic book Minchat Ani. Solomon describes Rabbi Yisachar with great love and respect. A true man of learning, a person of high moral standards, he loved Solomon like a son. It is interesting that Solomon mentions among Rabbi Issachar's outstanding qualities the impeccable cleanness of his clothes. We may learn from this that cleanness was not the strongest side of traditional Jewish society at the time. Rabbi Issachar taught Solomon Torah and gave him the rabbinic smicha. It seems that during this period, Solomon got married, but his first wife died. He remarried some years later, but both marriages were childless. He was greatly influenced by his father-in-law, his second wife's father. A pious Jew, he was also a man of general culture. For years, Solomon had believed that only the study of the Torah was important. He used to fear and resent general culture. His father-in-law proved to him that he was wrong. He encouraged him to embark on an intensive intellectual and cultural journey. This period in his life was accompanied by extreme financial hardship. Solomon thanks his modest wife that for years silently endured poverty. It seems that eventually this difficult period paid off. We know that Solomon won the position of the rabbi of Trdosin, a community of a few hundred members. We know from other sources that he remained with this community for more than 30 years until his death in 1912. It is obvious that Solomon developed a critical attitude toward the place of women in Judaism as the result of a larger perspective on Judaism that he acquired thanks to his general studies. We may attribute his critical outlook on the Mishnah, which he blames for gender-exclusive practices in Judaism, to his acquaintance with the scholarly research of Chokhmat Israel that was at its height in this period. Throughout his autobiography, Solomon criticizes the curriculum of the yeshivas for being based solely on the study of the Talmud and the halachic literature. As the result, the entire community of Talmudic scholars lacked basic knowledge of the Tanakh and the Haggadah. Another interesting trait of his autobiography is his critical attitude toward the oral character of Jewish learning of his time. Students of the yeshivas were discouraged from learning to write. This practice produced generations upon generations of semi-literate men. The conscious distancing of the learners' community from writing was probably motivated by the fear of the subversive power of writing and of written text. The fear that writing may lead to independent critical thinking is certainly not peculiar to Jewish society. The discussion of this phenomenon appears in Derrida's well-known essay, Plato's Pharmacy. The problematic attitude of the yeshiva culture toward
some problems hearing you.
The scene of writing. Solomon values his ability to express himself in writing as one of the most important, if not the most important, achievement of his life. On a number of occasions, he expresses disdain toward the narrow-mindedness of his teachers and proudly emphasizes his command of writing skills, which he acquired as an autodidact. His own books exhibit a virtuosic command of the biblical Hebrew, along with a deep knowledge of halachic sources. Solomon's critique of the deficiencies of the traditional Jewish learning based on reading, oral discussion, and memorizing clearly defines him as a maskil. We know that one of the most important achievements of the Haskalah movement was the creation of modern Jewish literature. In hindsight, we must admit that Solomon's intellectual journey from a typical representative of the Central European ultra-Orthodoxy to an open-minded critic of gender-exclusive practices of Judaism proved that ultra-orthodoxy of his time had every reason to fear the subversive power of writing. To conclude, Salomon's autobiography did not really advance my understanding of his position concerning the place of women in Judaism, but it helped me understand why someone like Solomon wrote such a book. Born into an ultra-Orthodox community with established norms and conventions, he rebelled against them. His life journey shows that he was an individualist driven by the natural curiosity and an innate need for self-fulfillment. Only someone who already as a young boy exhibited independence and critical outlook on life could, as a rabbi, rise against well-established traditions and halachic rulings while remaining a truly religious person. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll discuss a bit later after all the talks. So, but I have just one small question. I've been reading rabbinical stuff of the 19th century. I just finished reading about 520 responsa books and others for my research. And you hardly find any refer to the two women as such. Women are always in the background. You never talk about women as human beings. They are a part of the surroundings, and they must be there, but talking about women as such, you hardly find anything. They simply ignore them. And what we know about the Maskilim is basically the same. You hardly find any reference to women within Maskilim. Shmuel Feiner wrote about it a bit, but it's a rarity. So in this case, in this sense, it's a very unique piece of work that you found. And
definitely, yeah.
Okay.